Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the board of Haven. Clearly you do a wonderful job stewarding this organisation. I'd acknowledge all of the honoured guests and all of the staff in the room, ladies and gentlemen from the public, and of course Ken himself. It really is an absolute delight to be here today in what I'm told is the centre of the universe. Apparently there is a marker somewhere close to Ken's office that says something similar to that. I understand that many of you in the room were expecting the Premier to be here today, and whilst Terry is obviously a more than adequate replacement for that, I will clarify my participation is simply reflective of the fact that Ken ran through a long list of everybody he knew and thought, I'm running low on stocks here. He decided to call the only person who he knew would have no commitments of any importance, and here I am. In fact, he rang me, he said, Scott, you'll come to the opening of an envelope. Would you like to come to our annual stakeholder meeting? Why not? But no, it really is great to be here, and I think it's great that we've got Terry, because Terry will actually share all of the relevant information, and I just get to talk about some of the fun things we do, because of course the key difference is Terry is an academic and I'm a practitioner, and Terry's job is really to look at what Haven does in practice and say, does that work in theory? So, as Chair of Power Housing Australia, and I just want to mention Power Housing and put some context on that, it's a national network of 28 large leading community housing providers. Between those 28 providers, we manage 38,000 units of housing, and most importantly, we provide a home between us for 80,000 people. That network, by the way, was founded here in Bendigo. Haven were a key player in that founding, and as you would expect, Ken was a key driver. I also have the privilege of currently being the Vice Chair of the International Housing Partnership, which through Power Housing Australia and country networks in the US, UK and Canada, connects 175 high-capacity housing providers in 4 countries, who between them manage 1 million homes, housing 2.5 million people. We're very fortunate to be able to tap into the strength of those networks and draw on some of their ideas. So as I was flying into Melbourne today, or as Ken tells me, the southern suburbs of Bendigo, at that regional airport out there, I was thinking about Haven and what it's achieved. And let me say this at the start, and no, Ken didn't put me up to this, and no, he didn't email me these exact words, but I actually do consider Haven to be one of the leading community housing providers in this country. And more than that, I think in Victoria, it is the leading organisation in providing integrated housing and homelessness support. It is really an outstanding model, and one that I think creates enduring value for the communities that you serve. So in reflecting on that and reflecting on why we're here, I thought first I might offer some thoughts on why do we need organisations like Haven? Well, these might seem like an obvious statement, but housing is the foundation of a strong economy and the backbone of a civil society. It's widely acknowledged as the critical ingredient for people to increase their social and economic participation. It is both a fundamental need and a basic human right. However, we find ourselves in a situation across this country, and ever more so in jurisdictions such as Victoria, where housing is no longer treated as a right, but rather it's something that's rationed, it's considered a privilege, and we have far too many people who are left out. There are a range of policy settings that have contributed to this, and I won't attempt to regurgitate the vast amounts of research that Terry and others have done that show both the current challenges faced by our housing system, but also the projected future if things don't change. And as I say, Terry will be able to quote you all of the statistics. I'm really setting you up for this, but I will say I don't use statistics because 37% of my statistics are made up and the other 80% never add up. What I can say is that without doubt, on the current trajectory, our social housing system around this country is broke and broken. The system has been a critical safety net for Australians. It's often been a pathway as people have sought security of tenure and affordability while they've addressed other issues in their lives. It's provided generations with an opportunity to build the necessary pathways into market rent or home ownership. It's been that springboard of opportunity. Or it's provided refuge from the challenges of life when people have fallen on hard times. Failure to address the trajectory of this system is simply unacceptable. In every jurisdiction around Australia, the net number of social housing units is declining under the weight of a public housing system that was once the envy of the world and is now increasingly being crippled under a range of policy settings that have entrenched and residualised it to the extent that the system is now devouring itself in the process of trying to survive. In Victoria, I understand the early housing category, that is for emergency shelter, has reached almost 10,000 applications statewide. According to the latest September quarter figures, the total waiting list has now hit 34,726 applications here in Victoria. And if you extend beyond social housing and consider the broader need for affordable housing, for those who perhaps aren't in such dire need that they qualify for the social housing system but yet have limited housing choices, there is an ever greater and growing need in that space. Key workers, people living with a disability, people in low-paid jobs, everyday Australians who are struggling, they need affordable housing. And national estimates suggest that we need some 220,000 plus affordable homes, and we need them today. And I put it to you that really affordable housing is not just about the immediate impacts on an individual family. Families will stretch their weekly budget, and some will struggle through and find the 50 to 60% of their income consumed by their housing costs to keep a roof over their heads. They might go without the essentials, and they'll live under the constant stress of whether they can pay their bills. But that impact's not just felt by that family, it's also felt in the broader economy. Because as a greater proportion of their income is consumed in housing costs, there's less available to spend on other goods and services. They go without essential items, but they also have no capacity to invest in education and training and the things that will grow our economy and strengthen our society. So the impact is much broader than just that household. An affordable home provides the opportunity for a family to be a productive economic and social social unit. So if we accept that housing is the foundation of a strong economy and the backbone of a civil society, and if we accept that the social housing system has been and remains in a state of decline, and if we further accept that the need for affordable housing has broad impacts and there's both a pressing social and an economic argument for addressing these issues, then the question must be, what are the solutions for the future? And in this environment, it is absolutely critical that every person in this room goes away with a clear message that we must not accept that our housing future will be any worse than our housing present. In fact, to do so would be to accept the further deterioration of the very things that are fundamental to modern life here in Australia. So what's the role of community housing in this environment, and what are some of the challenges we face? Well, organisations like Haven are a flexible and institutional type mechanism to combine a number of different policy and funding settings to maximise and optimise social and affordable housing. We are the cocktail mixers of the housing world. We are the barman that combines the ingredients to deliver something. We also play a pivotal role as community anchors. We ensure that it's not just about the bricks and mortar, but we are here to make sure that that is a part of the solution, and we ensure that the impact is about more than a house. It's about building the capacity of individuals within those houses and of the communities that we're working within to contribute to a better quality of life for everyone in our society, regardless of their socio-economic status. Haven has proven throughout its history that it is willing, able, and in fact has a burning ambition to deliver, to do more, to make an impact, to put the houses on the ground and put the models of support around it that are going to change people's trajectory. Haven's proven that it wants to serve the community here in Bendigo, and increasingly over the last few years to expand that reach across the state of Victoria. So one of the other roles that we should be playing as community housing providers is to consistently remind government that we're here for the community. We are mission-driven organisations. Most community housing providers, and certainly Haven as a case in point, have existed long before the current term of government and will exist long after the current term of government, much to their annoyance, perhaps at times. But it's really incumbent on us to work with government and try and influence policy in the way that will serve the long-term interests. On that basis, we are the stewards of the future in an environment where the political cycle is increasingly focused on the current term or on the next election. Housing policy is complex, it needs leadership, and certainly the work we do is not without risk. Around the country, we've seen experiences of policy solutions being run hot and cold. The introduction of fantastic programs with great potential that can really make a difference that are suddenly switched off at the whim of perhaps a particular minister or at a change of government, or simply because the naysayers have won over. At the moment, around the country, we see governments in New South Wales and my home state of South Australia that, for example, are pursuing mechanisms of transfer and other programs that will grow the role of community housing and strengthen their housing systems as a result. Tasmania has been a leading example where they have pursued transfers of public housing to the non-government community housing sector. Some 35% of their social housing system is now run by community housing providers. who are partnering with government and partnering with the private sector and reforming the system there for the better. As I said, housing is a long-term proposition. Developing housing is a long-term proposition. The time involved in putting the projects together and delivering them often takes years. And it's wonderful to see some of those outcomes being celebrated for Haven here in terms of the planning, and I know the years of effort that have gone into delivering projects like the Sydney Mire project here. But then the funding and the operation of those houses has to be considered through a long-term lens, and I think we heard Sue mention that in some of the clips we saw there. Programs such as the National Rental Affordability Scheme have opened some opportunities and opened the doors to new ways of doing things. They've opened the door to new sources of capital that might help us to address the issues of social and affordable housing. And when we increasingly hear, encouragingly so I would say, from our sectors in the private, our colleagues in the private sector, this emerging view that affordable housing is in fact essential public infrastructure. And that in fact, if that's framed that way, new capital can flow into the system. And it can provide an appropriate risk-adjusted rate of return. And that will attract the skills and the commercial discipline of our private sector partners, as well as new sources of capital that are part of the solution. But in order to achieve this, what we need is stability in policy settings. Victoria has been a leader in building a multi-provider system that starts to shift away from a single public housing model to a multiple provider system, encouraging community housing providers who are responsible stewards of public resource and the community interest. And Haven HomeSafe has certainly been a beneficiary of and a leader in capitalising and working with government on these programs. However, my observation is that a lack of policy certainty, a lack of commitment to the future and a lack of direction it threatens to derail and devalue the considerable work that has already been done towards this outcome. And whilst I'm not sure if there's anyone from government in the room, the key message I would give is that predictable, replicable and scalable funding and policy settings are critically important, but most important is a strategic commitment over the long term. They are the critical ingredients that you need to build a stronger housing system. Now, community housing providers, we are not the silver bullet, but we are a part of the solution. And I would strongly encourage the policymakers in Victoria to reclaim the leadership they've previously demonstrated in the social housing space and build a viable, strong and independent community housing sector that they can partner with and that can partner with the private sector. Take the opportunity to be authors of the future and not victims of the past. But of course, it's not just the role of government. It's also the role of community housing providers to bridge the gap between government and the private sector, to partner with the private sector and to draw in new sources of capital and expertise that can be applied to further the mission that we serve, and also to earn that appropriate rate of return. I keep coming back to that because it's so important that private capital will be attracted into spaces where it can make an appropriate return. And I think that we as community housing providers play a role in helping to be part of that solution that will drive change in this system. And it's been wonderful to see that Haven has been doing a number of projects where it is drawing in increasingly significant players in the private sector to be part of the solution they're offering. And part of that funding mix then, of course, extends, and we've heard in the short clip already, into the philanthropic sector. And where philanthropic capital can play an ever-increasing role is in demonstrating how these blended capital solutions, as I call them, can change the outcome. If you take a little bit of philanthropic money, if you take a little bit of subsidy from government and you mix it together, as I say, we are the cocktail mixers of the housing world, and we put it together with private capital, we can do more. We can put together the bricks and mortar solution and we can put together the service programs that will ensure that we're changing the trajectory of the residents that are living in those homes. So to any philanthropists in the room, I'd say, firstly, thank you. Your work and your capital is greatly appreciated. But secondly, the use of your capital can strategically influence and lead both government and the private sector. And philanthropic capital has a significant power to show the private market and government how things can be done differently, to make them comfortable, to get them involved and to show them that we can do more together. You are a critical part of the mix and we'll certainly make the cocktails if you provide the spirit. The future success of organisations like Haven HomeSafe is dependent on a strong and independent sector that has a mature relationship with government and it engages with the private sector. It must be a sector that operates within an appropriate regulatory system, and I pay homage to the Victorian regulator. Sorry, Ken, did I get that right? Yes, good, okay. Your review's coming up soon. Good, thank you, Anthony. But appropriate regulation is very important to give confidence that we are, in fact, effective stewards of the public trust and investment that is manifested in our organisations. But most importantly, and that's evidenced by today, we are accountable to the communities that we serve. Providers that engage with and work with our residents, we do things with our residents, we don't do things to them. And I think that's evident in the room here today. So in closing, I would say that I think if you've walked through the front door of a Haven service, as I've had the opportunity to do, and if you've been greeted at the door, and if you've seen the service model that respects the needs of the individual and it seeks to match it to those available resources, you'll see the elements of the cocktail being blended and the outcomes that can be achieved. You'll see the elements of success, and I think today is a celebration of what Haven has achieved, and more so, the foundation has been laid for what Haven can achieve into the future. Thank you.